Hi, Misfits. This is Kate.
And this is Luke from Unit 1 of Horrorwood Castle.
From Unit 1. It's Luke from downstairs.
Oh, from Luke downstairs. All right.
Welcome to Horrorwood. That was perfect. I loved it. Yes, thank you for filling in today in the co-host chair.
It's a pleasure to be here today, Kate.
I love that you're filling in for a number of reasons. Number one, because you actually listen to the show.
Long-time listener, first-time podcaster.
You are, well...
Second-time podcaster.
I was going to say, you are a veteran podcaster now because, dare I mention, your riveting work about risk management strategies.
I really tried. I'm not sure if anybody listened to it, though.
I listened.
Oh, thank you, Kate. Well, I'm excited to be here to talk about horror.
Great. This is not necessarily a horror episode or like a horrific episode per se. Before we get into it, I do want to give one shout out to our newest Patronian. Her name is Kim Pope. She is our newest accomplice.
Whoop, whoop.
So thank you so much, Kim.
Thanks, Kim.
Truly appreciate your support. And with that said, Luke, are you ready to discuss a very popular cult classic of a film?
I love it. Let's go.
I love it. Let's go. As I said, I mean, people that are listening to this have seen the title, but as I've said, it's not a horror per se. No one gets murdered in this episode, although most of the people are probably dead because the movie came out like 54 years ago, but there's that.
So I don't know if I'm supposed to say that I know what the content is.
It's totally fine if you do.
So that's why I was like, oh, what do I say?
I got you. It's true. I don't typically tell the other person what the topic is going to be.
Because usually when you say it, Kevin's like, wow.
Yeah. Sometimes he and I will share just because there's been a couple times where we both think to cover like the same thing. So we've kind of gotten to a point where we're like, I think I'm going to talk about this for next week. Yeah, normally I don't share it, but I did tell you because I wanted to make sure that number one, you were totally comfortable with co-hosting today, even though like, there's nothing weird about this episode that would like...
Well, and you know that I'm a child of the 70s, so I had to know the movie.
Yeah. I was hoping that you'd seen it. Even though if you haven't seen it, like, it's not horrible. You can like still follow along the episode, but also you've had 54 years, so...
I'm not 54 years old, Kate.
No, you're not. I didn't say you were... Aren't you 46?
No, I'm 45.
Oh.
I'll be 46 this year.
I thought there was more distance between
it's all that gray hair
between us. Anywho, yeah, the gray hair came from you running through the graveyard this morning.
That's right.
As you love to do, apparently, which I just found out.
Well, let's be honest here. I was walking through the graveyard.
Okay, walking. I liked your text that was like, I'm going to do a 5-mile walk, run, die. See you later.
I only made it 3.5.
That's still good. That's impressive.
It was a really nice time. It was beautiful. And
you didn't see any coyotes, which is good because they live in those graveyards.
No coyotes, a few ghosts.
Yes, Luke told me when he came over that he likes to pick out. I still don't think you're telling the truth on it. I feel like this is a lie.
I'm absolutely telling the truth.
Okay, say what you did.
So I pick a specific year and I look for people that died in that year, and then I stop and talk to those people. So this year, or today, was 1921.
Okay.
Ironically, there was a lot of people that died in 1921 in that graveyard.
Oh.
Most of them were German.
Huh. That is interesting.
Or had German-sounding names.
Yeah.
I don't know for sure where they came from.
Interesting. The movie that we're talking about today was actually shot in Germany. It was shot in Munich.
I love that.
Let's get into it. Let's start.
So what is this topic, Kate?
I should probably say, even though you already know. We're talking about the 1971 film Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory.
So quick question for you, Kate.
Yes, Luke. You sound very radio personality.
When a movie says 1971, does that mean it was filmed in 1971 or it was released
That's when
in
it was
1971?
released. Yeah.
Got it.
This
All
film
right.
was actually shot in the fall of 1970 over a course of like 3 months, but it came out in the spring of 1971.
Look at you.
Look at me.
Catopedia.
Catopedia. Just saying things. So, yes, we're talking about the original Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory film. Obviously, there was a remake in 2005, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, and then recently the Timothée Chalamet-led version, Wonka, the prequel. But we're only going to focus on the first film today.
That's good because it's the only one I've seen.
Perfect. I haven't seen, well, it's been a while since I saw the Johnny Depp one. I do like Johnny Depp, but like, I don't remember a ton from that movie, but I do remember not connecting with it, I guess, as much as I connected with the original, because the original is just like, it's so good, even though it's the most different from the actual book that Roald Dahl wrote.
Kind of like when Carrie Underwood tried to redo The Sound of Music, and it was so bad. Sometimes you just can't touch a classic.
Sometimes you can't. Before this movie was shot, before it was even like a thought in the air, a lot was going on with the Hollywood studio system. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that kind of leads into the production of this film. So by the 1960s, the old Hollywood studio system was on its way out due to a number of factors. For one, TV. TV starts booming. In the US, more than 90% of homes had a TV by the 1960s. And then when color television came to be, it was like, whoa. So everyone is staying home and saving money and not necessarily going out to see the big studio films because they can all just sit around their living room as a family.
Makes a lot of sense.
Sure
Kind of happened
does.
again during the pandemic, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, look at streaming now. Like, I feel like as soon as a movie's out in theaters, 2 weeks later, it's already on
I
streaming.
know. Wicked came out on Paramount within days,
Peacock.
weeks. Oh, Peacock.
Let's.
That was close. It started with a P.
We do talk a lot about, well, not a lot, but Paramount comes up because it's the company that Willy Wonka was sold to after it was released. Also, during this time of the 1960s, think about what's happening in the world, especially in this country. You've got the civil rights movement.
Tricky Dick.
What is that? Tricky Dick?
The president.
Oh, okay. I thought it was a weird porn thing, and I wasn't sure what was happening.
I wouldn't talk about that, Kate.
I mean, you could. So, yeah, there was Tricky Dick.
Wasn't he president in 71?
When did he take office?
I don't know.
Okay. Well, history is not part of the lesson today, except when it pertains to Hollywood. So here we go. So you've got the civil rights movement, which put a spotlight on minority representation in Hollywood. Audiences were getting kind of tired of like the big Westerns and the big political war dramas and the big family musicals. So think like My Fair Lady and Sound of Music, perfect example. And that had those kind of films had dominated the industry for the previous decades, but often regulated minorities to one-dimensional stereotypical roles like the maid or, what have you. So communities, including Black and Latinx and Indigenous peoples, began protesting the way that they were depicted by Hollywood. And
As
began,
they should.
Yeah, exactly. And they began planning to open their own production companies. And after Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated, a group of Hollywood heavyweights, which included Sidney Poitier, Candice Bergen, Marlon Brando, and Paul Newman, created a nonprofit group with the sole purpose of producing films regarding racial and social issues, which I think is really cool. Also during this time, we're in the middle of the Vietnam War. And thanks to all those television sets in people's homes, they're now seeing graphic images of violence that they previously wouldn't have seen. They'd hear on the radio, but then to have that image in their homes kind of brought a new urgency or a new feeling towards people of this isn't right and we need to do something about this. So then you have this huge opposition and this public outcry about the war, particularly among young people who are terrified they're going to get drafted and who are against the war. They don't support it. So when it came to entertainment, these younger audiences wanted to see more films that spoke to the reality of what was actually happening in the world. And the old studio execs just didn't know how to connect with them anymore. Additionally, we've also got some significant legal cases that contributed to the breakdown of the studio system. In 1950, Italian director Roberto Rossellini directed a piece called The Miracle, which was one of 3 segments in an anthology film. And in a nutshell, the film is about a young woman who sees this guy with a beard, and she's like, ooh, he has a beard. He must be a saint. Oh, I thought you were going to say something.
I was going to ask if it was a beard that was on his face or a beard that he had in his arm.
Thank you for asking me to clarify.
But you clarified before I was able to ask.
The beard was on his face. But that's an excellent question.
All right, good.
And I hope to hear more like that throughout the episode. So she sees the guy with the beard. She's like, I like this guy with the beard. He looks totally like my favorite saint. It must be Saint Joseph. So she's like, hey, Saint Joseph, please take me to heaven so I can be happy and free.
Isn't Saint Joseph who you bury upside down in your yard when you're trying to sell your house?
Okay, I've never heard that, and I don't know who the saints are. So
That might be Saint Michael. I could be wrong.
I don't know.
All right, sorry.
Are you
Cut
Catholic?
that if I'm wrong. No, I'm not Catholic. That's why I don't know it.
Okay, I don't know it either. So this guy with the beard is like, yeah, sure, totally. I'll take you to heaven. Here, drink some wine. So she drinks this wine and
I love
passes
wine.
out. I know you do. And passes out. And the guy with the beard then rapes her and impregnates her. So it's all of that in the film, but in Italian. When this foreign film showed in a small art house theater in New York, the Catholic Church went apeshit, calling it blasphemous. Cardinal Spellman of New York publicly denounced the film, and the Catholic Church tried to have it banned. If this film had been made in America, it likely never would have made it to the screen due to the Hays Code, which I've talked a little bit about on here. The Hays Code dictated what could and couldn't be shown on screen, like how much nudity could be shown. You know, can this animal death be shown versus this one? There's a lot of animal death on the screen, but it's that kind of thing. It's like this moral code that productions were supposed to adhere to. And although it's named after William Hays, who headed the Motion Picture Producers and Distributors of America, the Hays Code was actually co-written by a Jesuit priest, Father Daniel Aloysius Lord, and a devout Catholic named Martin Quigley. So it was intended to establish a moral system rooted in Catholic theology, which I don't think that's talked about much.
What year was this again?
So the Hays Code started, I want to say, in the 20s. Hey, Kate here, fact-checking herself. It was actually started in 1930, but began being enforced in 1934. It eventually ended in 1968.
Wow.
Foreign films, however, were not ruled by the Hays Code. They're off in their other countries. They can make whatever shit they want. So they have a lot more creative freedom. And when the church tried to ban The Miracle in New York, the film's distributor took the case to the Supreme Court, which ruled it protected under the First Amendment. So now you've got all these foreign films that can be shown in the US without the threat of censorship. And this is when we see a wave of movies from London, from France, from Italy, coming into America that were edgy and experimental, that pushed the boundaries. We see the Bond franchise, the Beatles films, stars like Michael Caine, Vanessa Redgrave, Brigitte Bardot. Foreign film festivals were becoming really popular in the US, and it's what audiences had been craving. So these foreign films were encroaching on Hollywood's territory and pushing the big studios out of the way. Then in 1968, as I said, Hays Code, bye-bye. And now these independent productions have more creative freedom. Another landmark Supreme Court case that led to the end of the studio system is the Hollywood antitrust case of 1948. Again, it's like a couple of decades before the time we're talking about, but it all kinds of slowly unravels over the years and causes like the downfall of these studios. It's also known as the Paramount case because Paramount was the biggest studio at the time. Kevin's talked about Paramount before and their vertical integration, where basically studios had a monopoly over the industry. They had their own writers and directors and actors all under contract, and they owned movie theaters. So that meant that those theaters would only show movies produced by that particular studio. In 1948, the Supreme Court ruled that studios must divest from their movie theater chains and changed how Hollywood movies were produced and distributed. So this set a whole chain in action of all of the big wigs like Paramount, Warner Brothers, Universal, like all of these kind of start to veer away from buying films.
I thought you said this wasn't a history lesson today, Kate.
You know what? It
very much is.
It very much is getting really into the history.
I'm enjoying it.
Okay, good. So with studios no longer being able to monopolize the industry, more foreign and independent projects being made, and audiences craving edgier, more realistic content, and with minorities protesting the antiquated ways of the out-of-touch studio execs, the major motion picture companies found themselves a little broke. So rather than financing films, which is what I was getting to a second ago, many of the studios opted instead to acquire them for distribution. So basically the studios, they wouldn't put up the money up front, but they'd agree to promote films and make sure that they were seen, and studios would make money off the back end that way. So this created an opportunity for companies that had nothing to do with Hollywood, companies like Mattel and General Electric that made products, to break into the film industry. They would put up the money for a film in hopes of increased brand recognition or to promote a particular product. And one of the companies interested in making their mark on Hollywood history was Quaker Oats.
I think about diabetes when I think of Quaker Oats.
I think the opposite, because I think oatmeal, it like makes you healthy.
Yeah, but the guy that promoted the Quaker Oats back in the 80s was also the guy that did the diabetes commercial.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Do you remember who I'm talking about?
I don't remember this guy.
I can't think of what his name is.
Yeah, I don't remember.
I'll look it up later.
Okay, please do. For its first theatrical project, the company famous for its oatmeal funded a documentary called Say Goodbye, a graphic film about the relationship between man and nature with horrific scenes.
How does this relate to Quaker Oats?
They funded it.
Yeah, but how does that create brand recognition?
This is like their little foray into film. Like, hey, they meet up with a production company. We'll give you this money. Like, we're just testing the waters here. So how about we, finance what you're doing here and let's develop a relationship.
All right.
So this Say Goodbye film, there's a lot of animal death. There is a giraffe that a man throws a spear into its neck, and the giraffe slowly bleeds out over several days. I don't recommend it, but Say Goodbye was produced by Walper Productions, which was headed by Dave Walper. And the relationship between Dave and Quaker Oats was about to take a fortuitous turn. It's just that neither of them knew it yet. Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory is based on the novel Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, written, of course, by Roald Dahl. We've discussed Roald Dahl on this podcast in our Gremlins episode. Unlike the Gremlins, a story which Roald Dahl stole and passed off as his own, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory actually was his original creation, an idea that stemmed from his days at the prestigious Repton boarding school in England. And while he was at that school, Cadbury, which was one of England's largest chocolate makers, would send boxes of their new products to the students to taste test. And they'd ask the kids to give their opinions on each one.
Those were some lucky kids.
Right?
I love chocolate.
That never happened at my school. We never got to
me either.
taste test candy. Dahl took his job as an amateur candy tester very seriously, giving critiques like, too subtle for the common palate. He dreamed of being a candy maker when he grew up. So as an adult, he began forming a story around his experience. And he would tell the story to his kids, and they fucking loved it. They'd beg him to tell it over and over again. So as he does, it develops.
It's more elaborate.
Exactly.
Yep.
So he started working on turning it into a novel. But tragedy struck while he was writing. In December of 1960, his 4-month-old son Theo was in the care of a babysitter who was pushing him in a baby carriage while they were out walking in New York City. And a nearby cab driver accidentally pressed the accelerator instead of the brake, slamming into the baby carriage and throwing Theo about 40 feet.
How horrible.
Theo's skull was shattered, which led to hydrocephalus, which is when fluid builds up on the brain, And he had to have a shunt installed that was supposed to drain the excess fluid from his brain. But the shunt often malfunctioned and jammed, which caused a whole host of other problems.
He didn't make it.
He actually did.
Oh, wow.
So Roald Dahl teamed up with a friend of his named Stanley Wade, who was a hydraulic engineer, and a neurosurgeon named Kenneth Till. And together, the three of them created the Wade-Dahl-Till valve, or the WDT valve, which was a huge improvement over the standard shunt that Theo had. By the time the device was perfected, however, Theo had actually already healed and didn't need the valve, but it did help thousands of other children.
Is that how the valve comes into the story of Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory?
Wait, where's the valve?
Remember when Augustus gets stuck in the...
in that big tube?
Yeah.
Oh, God. What's interesting
Probably unrelated.
What's interesting is that he's writing the story as this shit is happening in his personal life. So I wouldn't be surprised, even though
Completely unrelated, but yet somehow related.
Maybe.
Yeah.
2 years later, however, tragedy struck another of Dahl's kids. His oldest, Olivia, was just 7 years old when her school sent home a note to parents warning them of a measles outbreak.
Vaccinate your children, people.
Well,
vaccinate your children.
The problem was they were a few months shy of the measles vaccine, because the measles vaccine came out 1963, I believe it was, and this is 1962. So though there was no vaccine at the time, there was a drug called gamma globulin, which could protect against encephalitis, or the swelling of the brain. And encephalitis affects about 1 in every 1,000 measles sufferers. The Dahls had 1 dose of gamma globulin available to them, so they gave it to Theo. It seemed like the logical thing to do because he'd been struggling with all this fluid on his brain, and they wanted to make sure he was protected. They were like, we don't want to take our chances. This kid just recovered from a traumatic brain injury. We've got to do what we can to keep him safe. And he was only 2 years old at the time. And it worked. Theo didn't get sick. But 7-year-old Olivia did come down with a case of the measles. She was sick for a few days, but after the 3rd day, her fever broke and she was feeling much better.
She didn't make it.
She did not. She was sitting up in bed playing chess with her dad, so Roald and his wife Patricia weren't too worried. But the next day, around 5 p.m., Olivia started having convulsions and then suddenly went completely limp. Roald had been out in his garden shed writing, so Patricia summoned him inside and they called an ambulance, but doctors were unable to resuscitate her. She died of encephalitis, which a dose of gamma globulin could have prevented. And Roald never forgave himself. And to cope, he poured himself into his work.
I thought you were going to say he poured himself into alcohol.
I don't think he was an alcoholic.
That's good.
That is good.
Yeah.
1 point for Roald Dahl. I do find it odd, though, that to cope with losing his daughter, he wrote a book where several children meet their demise. Just feels like an interesting therapeutic approach, I think.
Did Charlie and the Chocolate Factory come out first? Sorry, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory come out first? Or did the Gremlins come out?
Oh, the Gremlins came out first.
All right, got it.
Refresh on the Gremlins. The Gremlins was sold by Disney. Disney was going to make the movie, but then by the time they got it all together, the war had ended and people were like, we don't want to watch a war movie. So instead, Disney just turned it into a book. So it never became a movie in that version, but the book did help launch Roald Dahl's career. And then in 1964, he released Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. So Charlie and the Chocolate Factory was originally titled Charlie's Chocolate Boy. And the title character was black, and everyone else was white. And in this version, Charlie goes to the chocolate factory and enters the Easter room, where there are all these life-sized molds of different creatures, and one of the molds is that of a boy.
I was wondering at the beginning what the racial diversity and the breakout of change in movies had to do with this, but now we're getting there.
Yeah.
Got it.
So Charlie's like, cool, I want to check this out. And Wonka helps him in, at which point the mold fills up with chocolate and hardens. He's alive, but no one can see him or hear him. Catherine Kaiser, an associate English professor who researched and wrote about Charlie's Chocolate Boy, believes Dahl meant for the chocolate mold to be a metaphor for racial stereotypes, stating, quote, what better symbol of what it's like to be turned into a racial stereotype than a black boy who gets stuck inside a life-size chocolate mold and can't be seen or heard through this chocolate coating. Maybe? I don't know about that.
Seems very deep for a movie about chocolate.
I also feel like Roald Dahl, he's not exactly woke. So I don't know that he was really thinking of like, I'm going to make a movie that showcases how racial stereotypes affect young kids. No, I don't think that's the case.
Well, I like the end movie. I don't know about this version.
The Charlie's Chocolate Boy.
What do you think?
I'll give you a brief rundown of Charlie's Chocolate Boy. So Wonka takes him back to his house because he forgets that the boy is trapped inside the chocolate mold, and he's going to put him in the Easter basket for his kids, because in that version, Wonka did have a kid. And while the boy is there, trapped inside this chocolate mold, the house gets robbed, and only Charlie can see the burglars, but he can't say anything about it because he's like trapped in this mold. So he can see and he can hear, but they can't see or hear him. But he sees this. And so then the burglars leave, and Charlie starts like groaning. He's like, ah! And Wonka hears this, and he's like, oh my gosh, thank you for alerting me to the burglars. I'm sorry I kept you trapped in this mold forever. He lets Charlie out of the mold and is like, I'm not going to adopt you because I already have a kid, but here, you can go have a shop in the middle of town, and it's not my chocolate factory because I'm going to give that to my kid, but have fun at your shop. And the kid was like, okay, cool.
Very weird movie.
That's Charlie's Chocolate Boy. Yeah, didn't get made.
I can see why. There's a lot of problems with that, even in 2025.
So ultimately, it was Dahl's agent, Sheila St. Lawrence.
I love women with fancy names.
Sheila St. Lawrence. You're not going to love this woman. Who told him, please don't make Charlie black. And in true 1960s racist form, she said, it's a bad idea to have the hero be black because people will ask why. Sheila.
There's very little diversity in Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory now that I think about it.
Oh, there's no diversity. They're all white.
Yep, you're right.
With the exception of there is one Oompa Loompa actor from Iran, but otherwise, they're all white. After multiple revisions, it eventually became the story we know as Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, published in 1964. In the fall of 1969, the book had found its way into the hands of 12-year-old Madeline Stuart, and she couldn't put it down. She read it once and again before running to her father and saying, Daddy, I want you to make this book into a movie, and you can get Uncle Dave to sell it. Madeline's dad was director Mel Stuart, and Uncle Dave wasn't actually a blood relative, but was Mel's good friend and business partner, Dave Walper of Walper Productions. Mel Stuart had never heard of this book before his daughter brought it to him, despite that it had been an immediate success when it was published. Like, it was an instant bestseller. And at first, he was reluctant to take on the project. His forte was directing and producing hard-hitting documentaries like The Making of a President, A Nation of Immigrants, and the blockbuster The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. Not kids' movies.
But you do it for the children.
You really do. When your 12-year-old daughter is like, please make this movie, you're going to be like, okay, well, I'll at least read the book.
She sounds adorable.
She's actually in the movie, but we'll get there.
Can't wait.
Now, Mel knew Dahl was a celebrated children's author. He'd already written James and the Giant Peach by this point, but he also knew Dahl had a twisted sense of humor and could write some pretty dark shit. In 1953, the same year that Roald Dahl married his wife, Patricia Neal, who was an actress, Dahl wrote a short story called Lamb to the Slaughter, where a man comes home and tells his wife he's leaving her. So she takes out a leg of lamb from her freezer and beats him over the head with it until he dies. Oh, so there is a murder in here. It's a murder in this story. Then,
the leg of lamb murder. I thought I'd heard of all kinds of murders, but that's my first leg of lamb murder. Yeah.
Then she cooks the leg of lamb, calls the police, and is like, oh my God, I came home and I found my husband dead. And so they're like, okay, we're coming over to investigate. And they get there and they're like, well, I can't find the weapon anywhere. But when we find the weapon, we've found our killer. And so the wife, whose name is Mary Maloney,
she fed them with the leg of lamb.
Oh my God, please eat. You must be hungry, and feeds them the leg of lamb, thereby destroying the evidence. And as the officers are finishing up the meal, they discuss where the weapon might be, and one of them says, probably right under our noses. And Mary Maloney's just in the next room laughing. Lamb to the Slaughter was turned into an episode for Alfred Hitchcock Presents, and that's just a little side note about a murder story written by Roald Dahl.
It's always the spouse.
Well, obviously.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen every Dateline. It's always the spouse.
You have seen every Dateline. What's interesting is the very next year that, so he married Patricia in July of 1953. That short story came out in like September or October of 1953. And then I think it was just the next year where he came home and he told her he wanted a divorce. And he was like, don't make a big deal out about it.
Well, I'm glad that he wasn't actually murdered with lamb.
He wasn't murdered. And they did actually stay together for
or a turkey leg.
Quite some time. So Mel started to see the possibility that rather than make this a kids movie that adults can enjoy, he could make an adult movie that kids could enjoy. And that would give you a bigger audience. And he added, quote, I'm a chocoholic and I like the idea of being associated with anything centered on chocolate. So he just wanted to make a movie about chocolate.
I'm behind that.
Yeah. So he takes the book to his colleague, Dave Walper, and tells him, my daughter wants us to make this into a movie. And Dave looks at the cover and is like, what's it about? So Mel's like, it's about this wild candy maker and these kids, most of which meet horrible fates, and it's so fun.
Have you read the book?
Yeah.
I never read the book, I don't think, as a child. I can't remember it.
I mean, yeah, I read it as a kid, so I couldn't give you the details. I also read Charlie
Is the movie true to the book, or is it different?
Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory is not true to the book. Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, the Johnny Depp version, is much more true to the book.
All right.
And then I read Charlie and the Great Glass Elevator. Don't remember that at all. So Dave is like, the story sounds kind of cool. I'll check it out. And outside of Disney, there weren't a lot of companies making family films, so they found that this could be a way to fill that void. A few weeks later, Dave was chatting with the head of the ad agency that handled the Quaker Oats account. Quaker just so happened to want to expand their product line into chocolate. And they were working on a new chocolate bar. So the guy asks Dave, hey, any chance you have any projects that could help promote Quaker's new candy bar? And Dave was like, dude, you're never going to believe this. He's like, we've got a whole ass movie about chocolate.
How fortuitous.
So not only had Dave not read the book at this point, but he hadn't even talked to Roald Dahl to see if they could acquire the film rights to make the movie. However, he told Ken Mason, this guy of the head of the ad agency, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory is the perfect feature film for Quaker Oats' new product. So Ken Mason's like, cool, let me talk to the Quaker Oats people. Dave's like, great. And then he immediately calls Roald Dahl's agent. I would be freaking out because he has basically promised something that he, doesn't even know what the actual story is. He hasn't read the book and doesn't know if Roald Dahl's going to go for it. Roald Dahl did, obviously, sell them the film rights. Mel said it was $200,000. Another source said $500,000. Either way, that was a pretty hefty price back then for film rights.
Really? I think that sounds like a bargain.
Well, now, sure. But back then, not so much. And Dahl had one condition. He got to write the screenplay.
I thought you were going to say the daughter was in it.
Not for Dahl, but Mel Stuart, the director, he actually put both his daughter and his son. I'll just tell it now. He put Madeline in. She's one of the kids in Charlie's classroom. And she has one line. Like the teacher, someone asks her, how many chocolate bars have you eaten? And she's like, about 100.
That was so sad because Charlie only had two.
Two chocolate bars.
They couldn't even do the math, if I recall correctly.
And then Mel Stewart's son, who I think was named Peter, his son was 12 at the time, and he has a slightly bigger role, and I think he actually got credited in the film, whereas Madeline did not get credited. But Mel did give her $50 and was like, thanks for the idea to make this film.
She probably inherited something later in life.
So the production company was fine with Dahl wanting to write the screenplay because he'd written the book. What could go wrong? Obviously, he'd do great with the screenplay. Meanwhile, Walper Productions and Quaker Oats agreed on a budget of $2.9 million to make the movie, which is pretty small even for back then. It was essentially Quaker's advertising budget. And although the budget was tight, they were a small independent production company, and thanks to the recent downfall of the Hollywood studio system, they didn't have to adhere to some big studio's demands. So that allowed them to hire who they wanted and work within that budget. And two of their main hires were producer Stan Margulies, a good friend of Mel's who had worked with Mel and Walper Productions before, and acclaimed art director Harper Goff, who helped design Disneyland, of all things.
What a great hire for this movie.
Yeah. So not to mention all the sets for several other films. Harper Goff was like big deal. One thing director Mel Stuart wanted to be sure of was that the film looked realistic. So, for example, Harper Goff used items found in a junkyard to create the look of the inventing room. And it was a tight budget, but like he knew how to stay within that. So while they're getting their crew together, Roald Dahl turns in his screenplay, and Dave and Mel look at it and are disappointed when they realize it's literally just the book that Roald Dahl has written out by hand on a yellow legal pad with some screenwriting terms thrown in, like interior, chocolate room. It was way too long, had way too many characters, and was not going to transfer to the screen.
You're fired.
In Mel Stuart's book, Pure Imagination, The Making of Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, which was one of my main sources for this, and you can actually read it for free on archive.org. I'm going to link it, but Internet Archive has a lot of books that you wouldn't normally think would be there, and it's all free and it's great. And Mel Stuart talks about a lot of behind the scenes stuff and just getting things ready. There's a lot of behind the scenes photos and letters that he and Dave wrote back to each other regarding the film. So it's really cool. Check it out. So in that book, Mel Stuart speaks very highly of Dahl, saying that Dahl's happy to make the changes they asked of him. It was just such a pleasure. Dave remembers things a bit differently. He said Roald Dahl was not a pleasant person to work with. He did not like their suggestions, and it was kind of a tenuous relationship.
I'm going to put my money on his version of the truth.
On Dave's?
Yeah.
Same. One change Quaker Oats requested was the title. Quaker had decided to name their new chocolate bar the Wonka Bar to coincide with the story.
That is fascinating. I did not know that.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
And they wanted a title that centered around that. Thus, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory as opposed to Charlie. There were a few other reasons for the change that some sources have listed. For one, Charlie is a pejorative term used for a white man. And so there's the whole Mr. Charlie thing. And because of Roald Dahl's already racial undertones with Oompa Loompas that we're going to talk about in a minute, wasn't a great idea. They also briefly toyed with the idea of titling it The Candyman. But when that got up to Paramount's ears, they were like, oh, the Candyman is a drug dealer, so we can't have that. So they're like, okay, never mind. It only made sense. And really, the story that I think is the most true is that Quaker Oats was like, can you please name it something that centers around
It's all about money.
our
Follow
product?
the money.
It's literally an hour and 40-minute commercial for Quaker Oats.
If there was Wonka bars available today, I'd go buy one
I would
now.
too. So I think Nestle ended up buying the product name of Wonka.
Was
so
the Dubai chocolate of 1971.
It was the Dubai chocolate of 1971. People wanted that shit. If there was TikTok in 1971, it would just be Wonka. Wonka, Wonka, Wonka.
I don't watch TikTok.
I don't either, but Kevin is obsessed with that.
I watch Reels on Instagram.
That's where
Same thing.
That's where I see my videos.
Without the Chinese government.
There you go.
Yeah.
It's just Mark Zuckerberg laughing from his mansion. So Dahl was not happy with the title change. He was like, no, my book is called Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. But it's Quaker Oats money, and they want the change. So he didn't really have a choice. While Mel and Dave waited on Dahl's next draft, it was time to assemble their cast. To find the right person to play Willy Wonka, Mel wanted someone you felt you could trust and fear at the same time. And the actor needed to be able to sing. Roald Dahl really pushed for comedian Spike Milligan to play Willy Wonka, but Mel and Dave just didn't think he was right for the part.
Not a name I recognize. What else was he in?
So Spike Milligan was an Irish comedian, actually, but I think he spent most of his time in England. So he was a well-known comedian there. Dahl loved the shit out of him, but he just wasn't Willy Wonka. Peter Sellers begged Dahl for the role, and Mel and Dave did audition him, but again, they just felt he wasn't quite what they were looking for. Mel had seen Joel Grey in Cabaret on Broadway and was like, this guy can sing, he can act, he looks the physical part of what Roald Dahl describes in the book. So they bring him in for an audition. The problem was Joel Grey is 5'5". And for the screen, they wanted someone taller to portray more of that father figure. And Joel was too close to the kids' heights. So it just wasn't going to work.
Nope. Got to be tall as a man.
What's interesting is that most people are shorter in real life than they are on screen. Like you don't really often find
unless you're Ryan Seacrest. Ryan Seacrest is successful as a short man. In business, you have to be 6'3", or politics.
And that's words of wisdom with Luke from downstairs.
Mm-hmm.
Auditions for the character of Wonka were held at the Plaza Hotel in New York over the course of a week. And Mel and Dave spent that week looking at tons of actors, but just none of them were really the right fit. And then Jerry Silberman walked in, better known by his stage name, Gene Wilder. He chose Gene after the character Eugene Gaunt in the book Look Homeward, Angel, or maybe it's Gant and maybe that's a typo. And he chose Wilder because he admired playwright Thornton Wilder, and Our Town was a favorite play of his. He thought Gene Wilder sounded more like a serious name for an actor than Jerry Silberman. I don't really know that there's a real difference there, but I do think Wilder suits him. Like, I can't picture that actor being named Jerry Silberman, even though that was his name. Though Gene wasn't a massive star at the time, because this is before Blazing Saddles, it's before Young Frankenstein, and it's of course before his Emmy Award-winning role on Will and Grace. He was becoming more well-known and had already received an Oscar nomination for his role in The Producers, so he's like coming up for sure. Mel Stuart had never met Gene Wilder before, but the moment he walked into the room, before he said a word, Mel turned to Dave and said, "That's Willy Wonka." He had those piercing blue eyes, which could appear to have a twinkle or a glint in them, depending on what he wants you to feel. And he had that untamed curly hair, which in the film, they style it according to his level of madness, so it becomes more unkempt as the film goes on. And he was 5'10.5", so he had enough height to give an imposing appearance.
Love a man that uses half inches to describe his height.
He's like, I got to have that extra half. Mel said, quote, he had this sardonic, demonic edge that we were looking for. So Mel's just giddy with excitement after Gene auditions. And as soon as he left the room, Mel turns to Dave and is like, we found him. Oh my God, that's Willy Wonka. And Dave was like, awesome. Chill out because we need to be able to negotiate his salary. So you can't be too excited. And Mel's like, totally, I'm going to be so chill.
Why were they doing the casting from New York?
They actually cast all over the place. So I don't know why they settled on the Plaza Hotel, but that just happened to be where their casting office was, New York, because that's where they would send the kids to go. That was just like their headquarters.
Interesting.
So Mel's like, I can't be chill. I have to go tell him right now. Runs out of the room, chases Gene Wilder in the hallway, stops him, and is like, you're Willy Wonka. You've got the part.
I'm not from the industry, Kate. Is that common?
No.
I didn't think so.
Dave was pissed. So Mel walks back into the room and is like, sorry, man, I just couldn't contain myself. I had to let him know. And Dave was like, now we can't really negotiate with him. But the budget was tight anyway, so there wasn't going to be much negotiation. Before signing the contract, Gene had one condition. And the story I'm about to tell is pretty widely known. It's been told a million times, so you may have heard it. But I'll say it anyway because it's a big part of what makes the movie and Gene's character so effective. Gene told Mel, when I make my entrance, I'd like to come out of the door carrying a cane and then walk toward the crowd with a limp. After the crowd sees Willy Wonka is a cripple, they all whisper to themselves and then become deathly quiet. But I keep on walking until I realize that I no longer have my cane. I start to fall forward, and just before I hit the ground, I do a beautiful forward somersault and bounce back up to great applause. From that time on, no one will know if I'm lying or telling the truth. And Mel replied, you mean if we don't do that, you won't do the part? And Gene said, yeah, that's what I'm saying. And Mel said, okay.
Doesn't the cane magically stay in the air when he falls down?
So
do I remember that?
He sticks it into a brick. It's actually a styrofoam brick. So it's on the ground, stuck into this prop styrofoam.
Got it.
I can't imagine anyone else playing that part. I mean, sure, there was Johnny Depp and all of that, but like...
I like that he brought his creative idea to the movie because it really set it off.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And the kids, like the other actors, didn't know that that was going to happen. And so they had just met him like a few days ago. Then I think one of them, it might have been Julie who played Veruca Salt, was like, we just saw him at the wardrobe fitting. Like he was fine. So when he came out, they were all genuinely concerned about him. They were like, oh my God, did he get sick? Like what happened? So their reactions are very real. Roald Dahl, on the other hand, had some feelings about the casting. He hated the choice of Gene Wilder in the title role. He didn't think he was edgy enough, but I think it's the fact that Gene Wilder is so kind of even-keeled and soft-spoken that makes the madness play more effectively, because that character could be so eccentric and you just don't know like when he's going to flip.
I really like him. I think that he does a great job in the movie.
I love Gene Wilder. So he could seem like he's spinning out of control 1 minute, like in the boat ride through the tunnel, but then just be so like even keeled the next.
He is crazy in that scene.
I love it. I love it so much.
Good.
What's so interesting, so this is something that the Hays Code never would have allowed. In that scene, one of the images they project on the screen, because there's like all these, images going by, is a live chicken getting its head cut off, which...
I don't remember that detail. That's in the movie?
So, yeah. Some versions, depending on like which, where it airs or whatever, cut that part out, but it is definitely in the movie. There's also a guy who's a friend of Mel's who has a centipede crawling across his face. And Mel was like, that's the only guy that I could have thought of that would let me actually put a centipede on his face and crawl across him. That's just a little bit about images in the tunnel. To cast the kids, the production enlisted talent scouts to check out various children's theaters across the country. Really across Europe, too, because they had to get, they wanted an English actress. They had a boy from Germany.
International.
Roald Dahl still hadn't turned in a script yet. So Mel and the kids...
He sounds like the worst. Like, I don't like anything about him.
No.
At least the way that you talk about him, you can tell that either he's really bad or you really have it out for him, Kate. One of the two.
I don't have it out for him, per se. He's done great things. He's put some great art out into the world. He's also done some really shitty things. He was anti-Semitic. He's racist. He didn't see any problem with that.
I was going to say that could be said of any of us, Kate, until you said anti-Semitic and racist, because that's not true.
He's got some issues there.
Yep.
So because they didn't have a script to read from, Mel had the kids read passages just from the book. And in the meantime, he also hired a guy named David Seltzer to work on the script and kind of doctor it up because they needed something that would actually transfer to the screen. David Seltzer had never written a screenplay before.
Why did they pick him?
He'd worked with Mel and he'd worked at Walper Productions before. And he'd done like some writing work on documentaries, but he was just like, I had no idea what the hell I was doing. And he's tasked with changing Roald Dahl's work, which I can imagine is like very...
How did Roald Dahl feel about that?
Oh, he didn't like it.
I figured.
The story that made it to the screen is quite different from Roald Dahl's book. But Dahl, he just took too long to make the changes, and he fought them on all the changes. So although it is mainly David Seltzer's screenplay, only Roald Dahl is credited as a writer on it, which is kind of shitty for David Seltzer.
What else did David Seltzer go on to do?
You know what? Let's just IMDb him right the fuck now.
Love that. The internet web is an amazing tool.
It really is, and it never lies.
Thank you, Al Gore.
Who we just mentioned because he went to Watertown High School.
Wow, look at that.
It all comes back. I don't think we were recording when we talked about Watertown, but listeners just know Al Gore was already mentioned today. David Seltzer. Yeah, he continued writing. Oh, he's from Highland Park, Illinois. Look at that. That's right.
For those of you listeners, that is where the Home Alone house is.
No, it's not. It's in
Oh, well, are they close?
I don't think Winnetka is close to Highland Park.
Oh, okay. Never mind, guys.
But I don't really know my geography of Illinois that well.
Me either. I'm from Arkansas.
I forgot this. He wrote The Omen.
So this is where you got to start. Everybody's got to get a start somewhere, Kate.
He wrote the original Omen. I do remember reading that. And then he went on. I mean, he wrote a ton of stuff, but that was kind of like a big one that he's known for. So that's David Seltzer. So casting the kids, 12-year-old Peter Ostrom was the bee's knees of the Cleveland Playhouse Children's Theater. I mentioned this to Matt because he's from Cleveland, and Cleveland Playhouse, we didn't go there when I visited. Like, we didn't go in, but he was like, that's the Cleveland Playhouse. It's a pretty big deal. And Peter Ostrom had been working in theater for like 3 years at that point. He was really good. And the instructors there were like, you got to look at this kid. So they saw him. They loved him. They thought he was a natural. He kind of was that character of Charlie. Like, that's just his personality. And they had to make sure he could sing. So they said, "Sing my country 'tis of thee."
Interesting song to ask him to sing.
Yeah. After several rounds of callbacks, they finally cast him just 10 days before shooting began in Munich. For the character of Veruca Salt, they wanted an English actress, and they found Julie Dawn Cole at a theater school in England. It came down to her and one other girl, so Mel directed each of them to be as nasty as possible. He was like, "No, you've got to be nastier, be bratty." And so Julie's like, "Okay," and she's like coming up with everything she can think of.
She knocked it out of the park in brattiness.
She is so good. She's actually Mel's favorite character among the kids. And later she said, "I guess I was the brattiest," because she was. Her father was played by renowned British actor Roy Kinnear, and I might do a whole episode on him at some point because several years after making Willy Wonka, he actually died on set, like while they were shooting, by a freak accident. Before being cast as the gum-chewing Violet Beauregard at age 13, Denise Nickerson already had a pretty long resume. When she was just 2 years old, she was at a commercial for a heating company. And then at age 5, she appeared on stage as Wendy's daughter in a production of Peter Pan. And that show ended up going on tour and ran for 4 years, which she was a part of that.
She had to be very young then.
So she started when she was 5. By the time it ended, she's 9.
Wow.
Yeah. And then afterwards, she starts getting roles in various TV shows. But her big break came when she was cast in ABC's supernatural soap opera, Dark Shadows. I've never seen Dark Shadows.
Never heard of it.
It sounds kind of like Twilight, a little bit. There's vampires and werewolves and all sorts of characters. Its audience was primarily teenagers, and it was insanely popular.
How many years was it on?
I want to say it was only like 3 years or something, but by 1969, it was ABC's highest rated daytime series.
Wow, way to go, ABC.
Way to go, ABC. Way to go, Denise Nickerson. And Denise was recurring on the show. She played multiple characters, which was common for that show's actors. And by the time she was cast in Willy Wonka, she's already pretty established. Michael Bollner from Germany had perhaps one of the most unusual and slightly inappropriate auditions. So his character, Augustus Gloop, is the one that falls into the chocolate river and gets sucked up in the tube.
The first one to go.
He's the first to go. He doesn't have a ton of lines because he is the first one to meet his comeuppance. In the book Pure Imagination, that book I mentioned earlier, Mel Stuart said that the key to casting him relied heavily on what he would look like stuck in a tube. Yeah, how do you audition for that? So when Michael came in, Mel put his hands on Michael's shoulders and said, "Okay, pretend you're stuck in a large tube." And Michael didn't speak much English. He's German. And so he responded with something like, "I don't know what you mean." So Mel puts his arms around this kid and squeezes him like a big bear hug, basically. And as Mel put it, "I squeezed him like a roll of putty." And Mel told him, "You'll find out soon," which was his way of telling him, "You've got the part." He just squeezes the life out of this kid.
Maybe a little bit inappropriate.
Very. Imagine you're 12 years old, you're at an audition, you don't speak the language, and then suddenly some man you've just met is squeezing you.
That sounds very inappropriate, the way that you just said it.
It would never fly today.
Yeah, squeezing you.
At just 11 years old, Paris Thimen was the youngest cast member, but also caused the most trouble. He played Mike TV, the kid obsessed with television. Mm-hmm. And Mel said he cast him because he had a real bratty quality to him that was perfect for the part. He was just like, "You know what? You seem like a brat. You're great." Like Denise, Paris also had an impressive resume at a young age. He'd done commercials and voiceovers, and when he was 8, he was on Broadway in the show Mame.
Wow.
So yeah, he was already pretty well established.
Where was he from?
Maybe New York, but I'm not sure.
Oh, so the United States.
Yeah, he was from the United States. Grandpa Joe was a major character. He's the one who accompanies Charlie to the factory, and that role went to Jack Albertson. He was already an Oscar winner. He'd been a vaudeville performer. Amazing actor.
Couldn't get out of bed.
But then
suddenly his legs worked.
Yeah, and suddenly he's dancing, which is partly why they cast him, because he had been a vaudeville performer. He had a dancing background, so they were like, "Yeah, you can do this." Charlie's other grandpa, on the other hand, Grandpa George, was played by Ernst Ziegler, and Ziegler was almost completely blind as a result of being gassed in World War I. So in order for Mel Stuart to get him to look where he needed to look for his scenes, they would just shine a red light. And Mel told him, "Just look for the red light." and then that would get him looking in the right direction.
How sad.
He was also like 90 when
he
they
never got
filmed
out of the
it.
bed, if I recall correctly.
He did not know.
Yeah.
But
all right.
I mean, he was pretty old, and
It's a pretty limited role.
he died like 3 years later. So
I thought you were going to say 3 days later.
my favorite casting story is the one where they were auditioning people to play Mike TV's mom, who is described as a self-centered school teacher. The role eventually went to Nora Denny, who, for whatever reason, went by Dodo Denny at the time. I wouldn't want to be referred to as Dodo, but that was her
Maybe
thing.
Dodo meant something different back then?
Probably.
Yeah.
And she was great, but she wasn't their first choice. An actress named Jean came in and read for the part and just absolutely killed it. Everyone in the room got excited. They were like, oh my God, she's the one. They offered her the part right then and there. But she said, here's the deal. I've been offered a role in a new TV show, and I'm considering their offer. Schedule-wise, I can't do both, so give me 1 day. Let me think it over. Mel Stuart practically begged her to accept the role in this movie. He sat and talked with her for a really long time after she auditioned. He was like, you'll have so much fun. We're going to shoot on location in Germany. It's a Roald Dahl story. It's a classic. Like, you're going to want to be a part of it. She says, I'll call you tomorrow.
If you were offered a movie role or a TV role, which would you take? Same amount of money, same amount of lines.
That's really interesting. Ooh, oh God, I've never thought about that. I would probably go with a movie.
I don't know. I feel like movies are watched for a longer period of time.
I was going to say, I feel like they have more staying power.
Yeah.
With TV, you have the possibility of getting upgraded to a recurring role. So like there is that aspect of it. But if you just have one episode or something, then that's your episode and then it's forgotten. And that show could run for seasons and you're not going to see that. Although you do probably get more residuals with TV, but it's not about the money.
I feel like TV usually leads to movies. I mean, look at Jennifer Aniston.
True.
She had Friends, and then she's done 638,000 movies since.
This is absolutely true. And you're very correct.
Pretty
on
much
those
the same
stats.
storyline in each one.
Also true.
Sorry, I didn't mean to talk about Jennifer Aniston on Charlie and the Chocolate Factory.
I love Jennifer Aniston.
All right.
You sound like you have some issues with her.
No, I like her too.
Okay.
I really love her salad that she eats every day.
What is her salad?
I'll give you the recipe.
Thanks. So this actress, Jean, she hears Mel's big speech and like big plea for her. And again, she says, I'll call you tomorrow. The next day, his phone rings and it's her. She says, Mel, as tempting as your offer is, I've decided to take the part in the TV show. The actress was Jean Stapleton, who turned down the role of Mrs. TV to play Edith Bunker in All in the Family.
She made the right decision.
She did. And Mel even said that later. He was like, she made the right call.
One of the best characters of all time.
Oh my God. Amazing.
Yeah, for sure.
When the NAACP found out a movie was being made of Roald Dahl's book, they were like, we have some thoughts. Their main issue, and rightfully so, was with the depiction of the Oompa Loompas. In the book, they are described as, quote, black pygmies with the appearance of being made out of chocolate. Wonka tells Charlie, quote, they are real people. They are some of my workers. Pygmies, they are, imported direct from Africa. I just want to pause here and say you don't import people, you import products, but okay. Roald Dahl didn't think so. So Wonka tells Charlie he found them, quote, in the very deepest and darkest part of the African jungle where no white man had ever been before. To entice the Oompa Loompas to come back and work for him, Wonka tells them, if you and all your people will come back to my country and live in my factory, you can have all the cacao beans you want. You can have cacao beans for every meal. And the illustration that accompanies these passages is perhaps the most disturbing. The Oompa Loompas are all in crates. You don't see their faces, just arms and legs sticking out of the holes in the sides of the crates as they're being shipped off to Wonka's factory. So,
wow.
Slavery.
I don't even know how to respond to that.
Yeah. Contrary to the NAACP, Roald Dahl saw no issue with this. He was like, why are people upset about that? He told his editor, I've done nothing wrong. It's the NAACP that's being unreasonable, calling their complaints about the Oompa Loompas, quote, real Nazi stuff. So there's that.
So quick question for you, Kate.
Mm-hmm.
When you watched this movie as a child, did you think that there was an issue with the Oompa Loompas?
Well, by the time that the movie came around, so they had changed that backstory of the Oompa Loompas.
Sure, there's no boxes with their hands sticking out.
And they're not black people from Africa. They come from Oompa Loompa land and they're orange with green hair. Yep. At that time, I don't think it ever occurred to me like, there are no black people in this film. I was freaked out by the Oompa Loompas a little bit.
They were very different.
They did freak me out a little bit only because like they're all in unison and they all seem to know what's going to happen to the kids. And I'm like, what's going on here? They have secrets that I'm not in on. There
is one person in America that has very similar makeup to that today as well.
I think I know exactly who you're talking about. So thankfully, Mel Stewart had more sense than Roald Dahl did, and David Seltzer rewrote the part of the Oompa Loompas. Whether he knew it or not, Dahl's description of the Oompa Loompas wasn't far off from reality. For decades, chocolate companies, including Cadbury, have used child labor on cocoa farms to harvest cocoa pods. An article in The Guardian states that as recently as 2022, an investigation found footage of children as young as 10 in Ghana using machetes half their size to weed the plantation. One girl accidentally sliced her foot open with a machete.
So how do you make sure that you're getting morally acceptable chocolate going forward?
Well, so that's the thing.
Because they have that for coffee beans, right?
Yeah, and they did make moves about 20 years ago, which still seems like so recent, to try to eliminate child labor. The companies haven't done it. So these kids are not given any protective clothing to wear, and they don't really make any money, which is why farmers use kids, because the farmers can't afford to hire adults. And the chocolate companies pay farmers pennies, so they live in extreme poverty. And a lot of the time, it's the farmers using children from their own family to work the plantation.
I get so mad when people say that they can afford to do something. You can figure out a way to do it.
Well, it's coming from the chocolate companies, though. So Cadbury, and the reason I bring this up is because Cadbury is the one who would send the packages to Roald Dahl's school and have him taste test and made him want to be a candy maker.
What about Quaker Oats? Did they use child labor?
I don't know. I didn't look into it.
All right.
But it's the chocolate companies who are only paying farmers. This was in a UK newspaper, so it's in pounds. They said it's less than £2 for those farmers.
Whatever happened to the Wonka bar?
We're going to find out.
All right.
So going back to like these kids that are working in these horrible conditions, one little girl said she thought she was just going to her uncle's farm to help with childcare, but instead she was forced to stop going to school so that she could work long hours on the farm. Back in 2001, the big chocolate companies, Cadbury, Nestle, Mars, and some others, agreed to eliminate child labor, which is what I was just saying, but it hasn't happened. And a study done by a research group here at the University of Chicago found that in 2020, more than 1.5 million kids were working in the cocoa industry in Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire. Maybe I'm saying that wrong. Maybe I'm saying it right.
Sounds fancy.
It does. They are the two largest cocoa producers in the world, Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire.
I hope Big Chocolate doesn't come for us, Kate.
You know what?
We're exposing Big Chocolate.
Big Chocolate's been exposed for decades, so
all right. Well,
really, whatever happens, they've got whatever coming to them, I think. So just something to think about when you're looking at your leftover Cadbury cream eggs that you got for Easter.
What about Dubai chocolate?
Dubai chocolate?
Is that safe?
Who knows? Nothing is safe, really, Luke. That's what I've learned. To cast the actors who would play the Oompa Loompas, the production team searched all over Europe. Mel did want little people to play the parts. I'm not sure why. So they ended up checking out circuses in England and Germany, which, circuses are just exploiting them. It's all a bad system.
Horrible.
They found another Oompa Loompa actor in Malta, of all places, and another in Turkey. And then
Malta chocolate?
Is there a Malta chocolate?
No, I'm joking.
Okay. I was like, if there is, it's not part of this episode. And then others came from France and Iran. Most of them did not speak English.
Iran?
Yeah.
Wow.
I said that in the beginning of the episode.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do remember that
now. Communication was tricky because, a lot of them didn't speak English. So Mel had to direct them mostly by using hand signals, which I think was pretty difficult. Rusty Goff, who played one of the Oompa Loompas, he was already a successful actor in London. He did a lot of theater. And because of his acting background and the fact that he spoke English, he sort of became the spokesman for the group. And he's been seen in interviews. He's been seen in interviews years since. He's always kind of the one talking for the film or for his part in the film. Despite acting, singing, and dancing in what would become a classic film that people still enjoy even decades later, similar to the little people that played the Munchkins in The Wizard of Oz, the 10 actors that played the Oompa Loompas were not listed in the credits. But I have their names here. Rudy Borgstaller, George Clayton, Malcolm Dixon, Rusty Goff, Ismed Hassan, Norman McGlynn, Angelo Muscat, Pepe Poupée, Marcus Powell, and Albert Wilkinson.
Did any go on to have careers in acting?
I think Rusty Goff continued acting afterwards.
Okay.
I don't think the others did, but I think he kept it going for a little while.
Why do you think they didn't get credits?
They're not the only ones uncredited in the film. I will say that. There are other actors that have lines in the film that are not credited. I don't know why. I think if you're not credited, you don't get the residuals. Not that the residuals are like big. Like the kid that played Charlie, Peter Ostrom, he makes like $10 every 3 months these days from the movie. But there's probably a lot of politics to it that I'm not aware of. Yeah, it's just shitty that like you do all this work for this movie and you go through being painted orange every single day and you're learning choreography and you're learning songs and all this stuff, and then you don't even get a credit for it.
Yeah, true shame.
Once the film was cast at the end of the summer in 1970, everyone relocated to Munich for shooting. Mel wanted the film to feel as realistic as possible, as I mentioned before. So if the characters are supposed to lick the flavored wallpaper, those actors are going to lick the wallpaper, which of course wasn't flavored. It was just wallpaper.
Hopefully not the pasted side. That would be so gross.
That would be so gross. But it's not far from that, because the fruit that was painted on that wallpaper, because it's supposed to taste like strawberries and snozberries and blah, blah, those were hand painted on. So it's like painted wallpaper. They did put a sugar coating over it to try to make it a little bit more palatable, but
love sugar-coated wallpaper.
You're still
It's my
licking
favorite.
wallpaper. The chocolate room, which is where the chocolate river and all the trees made of candy and all that is, like the big room that they
That's
enter
the
at the
best
beginning.
part of the movie,
So good.
for sure.
Mel Stuart wanted that to be a big reveal for the kids, similar to that of Gene Wilder's entrance with the cane. So he didn't want them to know about it before they saw it. But Harper Goff, who designed the sets, didn't get that memo. And when he saw Julie, who played Veruca Salt, walking past the soundstage, he's like, "Hey, you want to see the chocolate room?" She's like, "Of course I do." So he starts walking her through the set, which was still under construction, but like she got a sneak peek and he's telling her where everything's going to be. Then later, they hear Mel saying, "Okay, by the way, guys, everybody listen up. No one let the kids into the chocolate room. We want that to be a big reveal. I want their original reactions. No one can see the chocolate room." And Julie's standing there and she's like, "Well, shit." So she just kept quiet. Like she was scared to say anything. And she was kind of scared of Mel. And they all kind of said this, that he was very like shouty on set. And she was like, "I just didn't want him to know that I knew anything about that room." And there is a picture online of all of them standing in the room and they're all like looking up like, "Oh, wow." And then Julie is looking down with kind of like a grin on her face like, "I've already seen this."
So when they film a movie in Germany, do they bring everybody from Hollywood, or do they have like set designers in Germany?
They have production crew in Germany. So they filmed at Bavaria Studios, which already had production crew working there. And so they hired a lot of them. They could bring some of their own people like Harper Goff and all those people. But for the most part, the crew, like the actual laborers, the grips and, you know, electricians and all that, they were German. So in the chocolate room, they had to eat some of the things, but only about a third of the candy was actually edible. The rest was made from cardboard and glue and paper and paint.
Wallpaper.
Wallpaper. And also wax. There's a cup that Gene Wilder drinks out of, and then he takes a bite of it. It was wax. So he would take the bite, chew and chew and chew. Then as soon as they say cut, he'd spit out the little wax bits. And then they'd do it all over again.
I try to get that in the first take.
Right. Mel Stuart liked to do a lot of takes for pretty much everything. There was one scene where they go to the home of Mike TV and he's in there with his parents and he's watching TV. And he says something about like wanting to get a BB gun or something. And his dad says, "Not till you're 12, Mike." 46 takes for that line.
46 is ridiculous.
It's absurd.
Like, how long would it take to film 46 takes of anything? An entire day?
Not an entire day, because it's just that one line that they were getting. But damn, you have to say it over and over. I don't know why. I don't know if that actor just couldn't get the line exactly as Mel wanted it or what. But yeah, Mel Stewart liked to do a lot of takes.
I bet Mel Stewart never hired him again.
And oddly enough, that actor, uncredited in this film.
Oh, well.
Despite having
maybe
a line. So a lot of the stuff in the chocolate room is stuff that the art department molded or glued together. So Julie, who played Veruca Salt, assumed this was also true of the giant rock that she kneels down next to eat some chocolate. But no, of all things, the rock was real. So when she dropped down, she hit her knee, and the rock was really sharp, so it actually cut her, which made her knee bleed, and you can see her knee bleeding through her white tights as she's doing the scene, and she still has the scar. To add insult to injury, Julie hated chocolate. So she's shoveling this liquefied chocolate into her mouth, trying not to throw up, while in pain from cutting her knee on the rock, which that knee is now bleeding. Augustus Gloop, his sin is gluttony, so all the kids represent a sin, right? Augustus Gloop's sin is gluttony, and he's the first kid to meet his demise when he falls into the chocolate river and gets sucked up the tube. To make that river, they used 150,000 gallons of water, along with several buckets of cocoa powder for the color and some cream for texture.
I mean, that might be unnecessary. They could have just gotten river water from the Chicago River.
Well, they're in Munich. You're going to import Chicago River. The color probably would have matched. Filming took place over 3 months, from the end of August through November of 1970. And while the temperature on the soundstage was kept pretty cool so that the candy wouldn't melt, underneath the hot, bright lights, that cream in the river started to curdle a little bit and smell. So the whole place for weeks smelled like milk that's gone rancid.
How long did they keep that Milky River going?
Well, they did try to combat this. They threw in a bunch of chemicals. They're like, here, this ought to mask the smell, which it did. But then they had a new problem. There was a chocolate waterfall that flowed down into the river. And now with these added chemicals, one of which was a salt conditioner to thin out the curdled water, when the falls hit the river, it created bubbles and a foaming effect and turned the water white. So to solve this problem, Hank Winans, who worked on the construction of the sets, flew from Munich to Hamburg to buy a special chemical that was often used in shampoos to control the foaming element of shampoos. This stuff was extremely potent. So for 150,000 gallons of water, it only took 2 cups of this new chemical to turn the entire river back to brown. Crew members started using the river as a place to dump the last of their coffee. Like, it was disgusting.
That poor Angus kid had to get in it.
Oh, he had to get in it so many times. Number one, the river was really shallow. It was only like 2 feet deep and ice cold.
How do you go under?
So they built a hole for him that he was supposed to dive into. The hole was only 3 feet wide. And he was really concerned because the water was so dark at this point. I mean, it's got all these chemicals, it's got coffee, it's got everything in it. So he couldn't really tell where the hole was. And the crew warned him, like, if you go 6 inches this way or that way, you're going to hit your head. This kid's terrified. The crew's like, well, just make sure you fall into the right spot. He had to do it over and over and over again. I mean, he didn't hit his head. Like, he fell into the right spot. They just wanted that many takes. The water's ice cold because that temperature, like they're keeping it so cold on the soundstage. He's walking around in wet, soaking clothes. Like, he had a pretty miserable experience.
Did he get paid pretty well?
They weren't paid much, at all. Perhaps the worst of his experience, though, was when he had to be stuck in the tube. To shoot that scene, he had to stand still.
That's real?
That's real. He's in that tube.
He's in that tube. I just figured it was like a half tube or something.
Oh, no. He's in a full-ass tube that they basically built around him and put it over him. And then they filled it up with water, that same nasty, dirty river water, up to his mouth. Then he just had to stay there. He couldn't do anything. He couldn't move.
I would not have done 47 takes of that scene.
I don't think they did 47 takes of that. They do let him out before they put in a dummy that is shot up as it's going up.
Oh, it's
the tube.
a dummy that shot up?
Yeah, they don't shoot him.
I
up
always
the
wondered
tube.
like where it went, where he went.
Yeah, it wasn't him. It was just a dummy. The next child to meet her fate is Violet Beauregard, played by Denise Nickerson. Violet's sin is pride and overconfidence. She's the one always chewing gum. By the time she was done filming, she had 13 cavities from all the gum she chewed.
They didn't have sugar-free gum in the 70s?
That is literally the next thing I wrote. I'm like, what about the sugar-free gum? Nope. Just
no Trident?
Giving her that sugary gum. 13 cavities. And she was 13 years old. That is insane. She said she never chewed gum after that again. The machine that makes the gum that Violet takes is made up of all these items and contraptions that are supposedly like helping to operate the gum machine. And one of the items is a beehive inside of a glass jar that's actually like making honey. Mel Stewart claimed that Paris Thimmen, who played Mike TV, opened the jar and let the bees out, and then one stung him. But in an interview in 2023, Paris says he thinks he does remember getting stung, but he does not remember opening the jar. He said, I was rambunctious at the time, and it does sound like something I would do, but I have no recollection of that. And he says it isn't true. But it's a story that has been told over and over. I mean, it was in multiple sources. And everyone on that crew, even Gene Wilder, talked about what a brat this kid was and that he was just such a troublemaker. So it could also be like one of those things of something went wrong. They're like, oh, Paris must have done it. You know what I mean? But he denies the bee story. Aside from Denise's 13 cavities, an even bigger struggle she faced was probably with her costume. She's the one who gets turned into a blueberry, which they filmed on her last day of shooting.
She really balloons up.
To create the effect of her turning into a blueberry, the costume department first made a rubber suit that had a hose in the back, and that was connected to an air machine. So they would inflate that suit until the belt popped off.
I remember the belt popping.
Yeah, that was the first part. Then for the next part, they had Denise lie on a giant sheet of construction paper and traced her body like she's a dead body. And then with that tracing as a guide, they made two halves of a giant, heavy-duty styrofoam ball that would fit tightly around her. So when they were ready to shoot the scene, it took almost an hour just to get her into the styrofoam suit. She's supposed to be rolled out of the inventing room by the Oompa Loompas, so they get her into the position on the floor, and then the crew breaks for lunch. So Denise is lying there, unable to move, arms stuck out to
like
her sides.
Sideways?
Like,
if I recall correctly, she was like this.
I'm not sure how she was in the moment they called lunch.
All right.
But she's just lying there and she can't really do anything. And since it took so long to get her into the suit, they didn't have time to get her out of it and have lunch before they had to get her back into it again. So everyone leaves for the lunchroom while she stayed lying on the floor of the set while a crew member fed her through a straw.
What do they feed her?
Something liquefied.
Some of that bubble gum that turned into tomato soup?
It could have been soup.
Yeah.
And every 15 minutes, he had to roll her over to keep her blood flowing evenly.
I would want it more than 15 minutes. 5 minutes?
Yeah, I don't know how. I mean, because she was like that for like an hour. Finally, the crew comes back from lunch and she's just like, hi, guys. And they start to film the scene of the Oompa Loompas rolling her out of the room. But because they were shorter than she was wide or tall, they couldn't really tell where they were going. So they kept accidentally rolling her into the metal door frame. And by the end of that day, she was covered in bruises.
At least they didn't show since she was purple.
There you go. Mm-hmm. This was her last day of filming. And she goes back to New York City where she lives. And 2 days later is sitting in class at her school. And she notices a couple of her classmates are staring at her. And then one of them turns to another and like whispers something. And then that kid turns and looks and kind of starts to laugh a little bit. And then another one points at her. And soon all these kids are looking at her and laughing. So Denise turns to her friend sitting next to her and she's like, what is going on? And her friend said, oh my God, you're turning blue. Denise runs out of the classroom to a bathroom so she could look into a mirror. The makeup that they used on set to turn her into a blueberry was starting to come out through her pores, and it looked like she was actually turning the color of a blueberry.
So basically the premise of the movie came true.
It's
in
like life imitating art.
And that's really the worst thing in the world, is to be made fun of as a kid.
Yeah, 13?
Yeah,
Oof,
for sure.
Rough.
Worst.
She joked about it later. She was like, yeah, no one ever asked me out in school because they were afraid I would change colors. The next child to go is Veruca Salt, played by Julie Dawn Cole. Veruca's sin is greed. She's the one who sings I Want It Now because she wants the golden goose egg. And in addition to trying not to vomit from all the chocolate that she had to eat and then dealing with her scarred knee, Julie has to fall through a trap door. She stands up on the scale, which tells if something is a good egg or a bad egg. She's a bad egg.
So bad.
But so good in that role. She's so good.
Can we just say that her hissy fit that occurred in that scene is the best hissy fit ever?
She's so good.
She throws the complete fit, and then if I recall correctly, she knocks an entire wall of boxes down.
Oh, yeah. She knocks a lot of shit over. And the thing is, like, if you really look at her facial expressions, she can change so subtly. I mean, she's really talented.
She's a great actress.
Yeah, Mel Stewart, I said, like, she was kind of his favorite. She spoke later in an interview about what a strange feeling it was to stand on that trapdoor. And the crew told her, okay, be sure you stand exactly in the middle of the trapdoor. You have to be perfectly centered. Whatever you do, do not put your arms up to the side because you'll hit your arms on the side, probably break your arms. And once you fall through the door, you're going to have to keep your head down. Don't stand up because the doors are going to close and you'll hit your head. She's like, oh, God. Okay.
It's kind of like Adele in Vegas at the very end.
Oh, my God.
When she falls through the trapdoor.
So good. I will say, though, Michael kind of ruined a lot of things for that concert because he told us everything that was going to happen.
Oh, well, sorry, Michael.
We love you, Michael. But Julie's biggest concern was the fact that there was a stagehand waiting below just to be there when she dropped down. She's wearing a dress. So she was so scared that the stagehand was going to see her underwear. And honestly, yeah, that would be terrifying if you're a 13-year-old girl. So that was like her biggest fear.
I figured she just fell into like a vat of balls.
Is that your dream?
You know, like at Showbiz Pizza or Chuck E. Cheese.
Like the ball pit?
Yeah, like the ball pit.
I wish that was the case. No, she just like
Do you think Adele falls in a ball pit?
It's probably a crash pad.
Yeah.
But I'd like to picture it as a ball pit. Or maybe filled with like rainbow colored sprinkles. That would actually feel a little bit more comfortable, I think.
And it would fit the premise of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory.
There you go. You should, Luke, why weren't you alive yet then to tell them, hey, here's what you need to do for this movie?
True.
Art direction, I think it's your new path.
79 was the year I was born.
You were not even a thought
Nope.
in your mother's brain when this movie came out.
I don't think my mom and dad were even married in 71.
Oh. Julie, this actress, was also subjected to essentially having her hair set on fire each morning. The hairdresser on set didn't like split ends, and I guess Julie had split ends. So every day, the hairdresser would burn off her split ends, and her hair actually gets shorter and shorter through the movie.
I'm not a woman, so I don't know about split ends and what treatments exist for them, but I would have assumed burning your hair would not
probably
be good
not
for them.
One. I wouldn't think
It's
so.
like conditioner?
I think it was the 1970s of it all. Because, yeah, I've never heard of like burning off split ends. My hair did catch on fire one time when I was blowing out candles on a birthday cake, but that's the closest I've
Do you
come.
think she was using a 2-in-1 shampoo conditioner?
Maybe, and those aren't as effective.
No, they're not.
Speaking of her hair getting shorter, Peter Ostrom actually went through puberty while making this movie, the guy that plays Charlie. So as the film goes on, his voice gets a little deeper. He gets a lot taller. Like you can kind of see the height change.
How long was the production?
It was only 3 months.
Wow.
Yeah. But he worked on it the most because obviously he's there till the end. Julie and Denise were not the only ones that received injuries on set. The Wonkamobile, which was Wonka's mode of transportation, it's this big machine that operates on soap. So I don't know if you can remember it. It's like they're driving along and like all the soap starts to foam out of it, out of like these pipes on it.
When is it in the movie?
It's when it's just Mike TV and Charlie are the only kids left. So kind of towards the end.
I don't remember it.
Okay.
I remember the pod where he shoots out. The Wonkavator.
Oh, okay.
It's called the Wonkavator. It's like an elevator, but then it shoots up into the air.
Oh, the
at
glass
end of the movie.
elevator? Yeah.
The Wonkavator.
Yeah, where the 3 white guys ascend into greatness while all of the enslaved workers are still living in the factory. Yeah.
You're taking it deep, Kate.
And that's Wonka. So this Wonkamobile supposedly operates on soap, but the crew did not use soap to put into it. they instead used fire extinguisher fluid. The characters on the mobile were Charlie, Grandpa Joe, Wonka, Mike TV, and Mrs. TV. So these 5 actors are riding along, and then all of this material starts to foam out of the pipes on this vehicle. Highly potent, big ol' skin irritant, and these actors covered in head to toe. They are covered with foam. So afterwards, they all start feeling a little uncomfortable. And then their skin starts to puff up a little bit. And then they all broke out in rashes. And all of those actors had to go several days with medical treatment, like undergo several days of medical treatment.
It's called workers' compensation, Kate.
Right? This movie was an OSHA nightmare. It violated every safety regulation you can think of because it wasn't regulated is the thing. In addition to that incident, Peter Ostrom, who played Charlie, spoke about how when he and Grandpa Joe drink the fizzy lifting drink that makes them float up to the ceiling, they were hanging by some very uncomfortable wires that were strategically placed, and crew members were slowly pulling those wires. So it's just people that are pulling them, lifting these 2 actors up. Peter said he also got banged in the head in the inventing room from all the pots and pans. So they all endured bumps and bruises along the way. Despite the injuries and seemingly total lack of safety measures, no one really complained. The kids were super professional. They showed up on time every day. Everyone grew pretty close. They all loved Gene Wilder. Gene Wilder really was kind of a father figure on the set for these kids, especially with Julie, because her mom was not there with her. She just had a school supervisor with her because her mom was back in England. And Peter, who played Charlie, very close to Gene. They were the closest because obviously they have, more screen time together. That by the end of it, every day they'd have lunch together. And then afterwards, Gene would buy a chocolate bar, and then they'd have chocolate together as they walk back to set, which is very cute.
Gene Wilder just died a few years ago, right?
2016, yeah.
Did those cast members go to his funeral?
I don't know if
were they a part of his life?
They weren't necessarily actively, a part of his life. They all participated in a documentary that was based off of Mel Stewart's book. And I do have a little thing at the end that Peter said after Gene passed, which we'll get there. All the kids and their parents, or guardian in Julie's case, they all stayed in the same hotel, which was Peter's dad's idea. Originally, they were all put up in a fancy hotel, but Peter's dad just felt like it was kind of, kind of cold and uninviting. It was just a very, yeah, kind of hotel. And it didn't, you know what I mean?
No, I don't.
It's it was fancy. Whereas the movie is about
They did do casting in the Plaza Hotel, so that makes sense. You could have just said it's like the Plaza Hotel.
There you go. This is why you're co-hosting today, because you can clarify for the listeners. Peter's dad was the whole reason that they're shooting in Munich is because Munich had this charming look to it that producers wanted. And he's I just felt the place where they stayed for 3 months should match that charm. So he actually moved Peter and himself to the Schloss Hotel, which is a very quaint, charming hotel with amazing views of the Alps. And after a couple of weeks, the other kids were that sounds pretty great. Why don't we all move over there? So all the kids and their guardians stayed together. And it was kind of like a big slumber party. They just had the best time. They bonded. Michael Bollner, who was from Munich, didn't stay. He just went home because he was from there. But everyone else stayed in the same place. In the mornings, they'd all come down to the hotel dining room in their pajamas and have breakfast together. And they hung out together even on their days off. And Julie and Denise, being the only girls, they grew really close. They used to hold, I love this, they used to hold seances in their rooms and try to channel David Cassidy.
With a Ouija board?
I don't know if they had a Ouija board, maybe. Despite their friendship, though, they had a little rivalry going for the affections of Peter Ostrom. They both had a crush on him and kind of took turns being his girlfriend. It's one day Julie would sit next to him, and then the next day Denise would hang out with him all day. And in the boat scene on the river, Denise's character is supposed to pick her nose, but Peter was also on the boat. So Denise didn't want her to pick her nose in front of him. And she was oh my God, please, no, do not make me pick my nose. Why do I have to pick my nose? And they were you have to pick your nose.
It's a core part of the story.
Core part. You got to pick that nose, girl. So she was so embarrassed. Even in interviews years later, she was I cannot talk about that. That fall, the entire cast and crew went to Oktoberfest, and Peter asked Julie if she would be his date, which literally just meant, hey, like, will you sit next to me on the bus? Julie had never been asked out before, so she told him, well, let me ask my mom.
Was this pre or post puberty?
This is peri-puberty. They're in the middle of puberty. Her mom was the one back in England, so for whatever reason, she didn't want to call her. She was like, this is the first time a boy's asked me out. So she wrote her a letter, snail mailed it back to England, and by the time her mom got the letter and responded, Peter had already moved on. He was like, she's taking too long, so he asked Denise instead. So that was just how their little love triangle played out. The actors playing the Oompa Loompas, they stayed in a different hotel entirely. I mean, they were adults and probably for the best that they were not near the kids because they liked to stay up late. They partied. They hung out together during their time off. One of them, Rudy, who was from Munich, he had made a ton of money owning a chain of nursing homes. And with that money, he bought himself a limousine. So he would swing by and pick up all of the actors playing the Oompa Loompas in his limo, and they would just like all go out and party it up, which sounds like the best.
Limousines are really something that should come back.
That was like all I wanted to do as a kid. I was like, I
me
just
too.
want to ride in a limousine.
With your head out the sunroof. Do they even make limousines anymore?
Of course, yeah. We took a limousine for my sister's 50th. It was really fun.
Okay. I forget you're rich.
I wish. Also, didn't pay for it. Once filming wrapped, it was time for the premiere to coincide with the introduction of Quaker Oats' new candy bar. The only problem was Quaker Oats' Wonka bar never saw the light of day. They could never get the formula of the chocolate right, probably because they're not chocolate makers. They make oatmeal. So the chocolate would just melt inside of the packaging before you even opened the wrapper, with some comparing the texture to like melted ice cream. So Quaker Oats paid $3 million on a 1 hour and 40-minute commercial for a product that didn't exist. And unfortunately, the movie didn't fare much better. Critics panned it, with the exception of Roger Ebert, who called it delightful, funny, scary, exciting, and most of all, a genuine work of imagination. It only made $4 million at the box office. It grew in popularity once it started airing on TV, and then when video rentals and video sales became a thing, cult classic. It took off.
Why do you think it didn't take off at the box office?
Here's what I'll say. Kids loved it. They ate that shit up. Parents, not so much. They just didn't get it, which is unfortunate because Mel was trying to make an adult movie. But parents, like, they didn't want to take their kids to it. They're like, okay, so a bunch of kids, like, die, I guess. And they hated the music, even though...
Do they die? It's unclear.
No. Let's say they meet their demise. Let's say that. People said that the music was forgettable. Disagree.
Totally disagree.
Yeah. Sammy Davis, the Candyman is, like, I think his only number one hit. He wanted to play that role, too, in the movie. And Mel Stewart was like, no, you can't. You're way too famous. But he did record the song for that. Pure imagination. I mean, the music is amazing. And the music was the only thing about that movie nominated for an Academy Award. Gene Wilder, he got nominated for a Golden Globe, did not get nominated for an Oscar, which is a real shame, I think. So after shooting on the film wrapped, Peter Ostrom never acted again, instead became a veterinarian. Denise, Julie, and Paris all continued acting for a bit. Michael wanted to continue acting, but his dad said no, that school comes first. So he becomes an accountant. And what's really interesting is that the film wasn't shown much in Germany. So Michael had no idea that it had become popular. And it wasn't until years later, when the cast was about to reunite for like a big fan convention, that they were like, we got to find Michael. So they put an ad out in a German newspaper that was basically just like, hey, did you play Augustus Gloop? Call us. And that's how he reunited with them. So he goes to this convention. There's hordes of people there just like screaming for them, super fans of the movie. And that's the first time he realized, like, oh, wait, people liked our little movie?
Reminds me of Craigslist missed connections. It's like, hey, were you here at this time?
Yeah. Gene Wilder died on August 29th, 2016. And when he passed, Peter Ostrom, who played Charlie, changed his profile on all his social media to read veterinarian, former child actor, inherited a chocolate factory on August 29th, 2016, which just like, I don't know. I just loved that part.
That's the best part of the movie is when he gives him a hug at the end when they're in the Wonkavator flying through the air and tells him that you're going to inherit it. Takes the darkness of the movie and makes it like very light.
So the very last line of the movie was originally Grandpa Joe saying, "Yippee!" And Mel Stewart was like, I cannot end this movie with yippee. So he calls David Seltzer, who at this point was off the film. He's on vacation in Maine in like a remote forest away from everything. He was like, I had to decompress. I wanted to get away from it all. In this like encampment that he's in, there is a tree with a payphone on it. And that was the only phone on the grounds of where he is. And the whole rule was like, if the phone rings, you answer it. It's for someone staying here.
How does the wire get to the phone if it's in a
I
tree?
don't know the technology. So one day David Seltzer's like out walking in the woods and this fucking tree phone rings. And he's by himself and he's like, what the fuck? So he goes and answers it and it's Mel Stewart. He's like, hey, I'm in Germany and I want a new last line for the film. And David Seltzer's like, I'm on vacation in Maine in the middle of a forest.
How'd you get my tree phone number?
How'd you get this tree phone? And Mel's like, I don't care. We have to come up with a new line. I can't end it with yippee. And David's like, okay, well, how much time do I have? And Mel said, maybe like 3 minutes. Like we're shooting now. So like, I need to know. So David's like, okay. And so the last line, I didn't write this down because I wasn't even going to tell this part. So I hope I can remember it. Gene Wilder says, you know what happened to the boy who got everything he wanted, right? And Charlie's like, what? And he says,
he lived happily ever after.
You got it. That was it. So I just thought that was like a fun little piece of that David Seltzer's just like in the middle of the woods. And he's like, okay, what can I say?
How do I remember stuff like that?
I have no idea.
Like I can't remember what I ate for breakfast this morning, but I remember that line. I wouldn't have remembered it if you wouldn't have said what you did.
The line before.
Yeah.
Yeah. I spent the whole last week researching this episode and I can't remember half of what I read because my brain is fried. But yeah, that is the story of Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory that Roald Dahl hated. I haven't seen Wonka. I think I'll watch it. There's also a documentary about Gene Wilder's life that I think is on Netflix. There's portions of it available online, but I think I'm going to watch the whole thing now.
So basically, Willy Wonka was a serial murderer?
So that's how I was going to start this episode. I was going to be like, today we're talking about a demonic recluse who murders children and everyone just seems totally fine with it. And then I changed that.
Gene Wilder does a great job of going from crazy to
he's
lovable.
So good. So he married Gilda Radner in the 80s and like they just seemed like the perfect couple. And then right after they get married, she gets cancer. And it's just like, she dies, I think, 5 years after they married or something like that. So sad. And he died of Alzheimer's, of complications from Alzheimer's. And when he found out he got the disease, he decided he was not going to be public about it because, as his nephew has told in interviews, he didn't want kids to think that Willy Wonka had this disease, which I thought was like, ugh, like stabbed me in the heart.
He's a good guy.
The best. Everyone on that set, I mean, especially the kids, said that he was like the best guy to work with. Like he just took care of you. He was very fatherly. He made sure Julie was taken care of because her mom wasn't actually there. And so like he got the other guys together, like Jack Albertson and Roy Kinnear, I think. And he was like, fellas, we got to make sure we look after her. Her mom's not here. Like just the absolute best kind of human.
Is the movie available on the apps right now?
Yes, it's on Max.
All right.
Yeah, so we can all go watch it now. And that is the story. Let us know your comments if you have a favorite memory of the movie. I also want to know, like, if you've seen both Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory and then the 2005 Johnny Depp version. I want to know which is your favorite because people are like black and white on it. It's either it's a love-hate situation.
So the new version is completely different?
So the 2005 Charlie and the Chocolate Factory with Johnny Depp is much more closely to Roald Dahl's novel. They kept a lot of stuff in there that now they could do because of like CGI effects and stuff. Like Veruca Salt getting carried away by a bunch of squirrels. That's in the book and that's in the 2005 movie. But in the 1971 movie, it's these geese and they're played by puppets essentially. And it's like all about the good egg and bad egg. I love the original version.
I'm going to go watch the 2005 version. I've never seen it.
I'm also going to watch Wonka, the prequel. Let us know what you're going to watch tonight. Let's just all have a big watch party. You can let us know on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, or Spotify at
Horrorwood Podcast.
Or you can send us an email at
horrorwoodpodcast@gmail.com.
Or you could be like Kim and jump on over to Patreon, and you can do that at
patreon.com/Horrorwood Podcast.
You and Matt with the forward slashes.
Love a good forward slash. Don't do the backward slash, people.
I mean, I just say slash. Aren't they all forward for the most part? Maybe not.
I don't know.
Grammatic police, come and let me know.
Or internet police.
True. Thank you so much, Luke, for being here. This is so fun. I hope you enjoyed yourself.
Thanks for having me, Kate.
And now you're going to get some spinach and artichoke dip that Matt made and some crostini.
I love that.
as your payment. Bye.